I played Ōkami in Japanese. Why? Because I study Japanese and I want to learn using various media avenues. Also, I wanted to get the most authentic experience of playing Ōkami that I could. For those of you unfamiliar with Ōkami, it's a game heavily influenced by Japanese mythology, so there's a lot of cultural context. It's similar to watching a foreign movie in English and missing out on all of the original puns and jokes. Japan has always been on the forefront of gaming innovation. A massive chunk of games come from Japan in general, so learning by playing games in the native language probably goes through a lot of Japanese students' minds. And it seemed like I wasn't alone when it came to wondering if Ōkami would be a good game to play. Redditor Jebi-sensei says, "Really? Because Ōkami is one of the last games I'd recommend to beginning or intermediate learners who want to play games specifically for language study." Well, I wanted a bit of a challenge. I had just finished Hard Boiled by Yoshimoto Banana, and my translation skills improved to a point where I felt confident tackling another thick stack of text. First, let's talk about it as a game alone. If you know this game is for you, and just want to know if it's good as a language learning game, feel free to skip to the time in the description. Ōkami is an action-adventure role-playing game that retells the stories of Amaterasu and other mythical gods and demons of Japan. In this retelling, Amaterasu doesn't take the form of a human goddess, but a good doggy. The title, Ōkami, is actually a pun for God and Wolf, but it's written as God. Amaterasu isn't the only dog though. If you like dogs, there's a special story arc just for you.
But wait! There's more!
There's a little cat story arc and a whole bunch of other animals too. Basically, if you grew up on a farm, you're gonna love this game. Ōkami features birds, foxes, monkeys, pigs, tanuki, tigers, and even a bear. However, if you hate animals, this game also features human beings. Both the humans and animals are written with quirky personalities in mind. One interesting character is Ushiwaka, who speaks with English mannerisms like "bye bye baby" or "you tachi" instead of "omae tachi" or something. In the English translation, he says a bunch of French stuff instead. Not only do the various characters have vivid personalities, many also have unique goals and motivations. The game's hint giver, Isin, tags along with Amaterasu not just to help save Japan, but he has his own underlying motives that flesh out his character apart from his brash and straightforward speaking style. Ōkami separates many of these colorful souls into their own story sections or areas of Japan. Sadly, once an arc is finished, they are almost completely dropped off for other characters, which was jarring because the former characters were presented to have a high level of importance in the story. For example, Susanoo's role in the 15-minute introductory cutscene gave the impression that he would be a key character throughout the game. However, his story turned out to be a focus for only a third of it. Even if the game as a whole is segmented in a way that creates little build-up between all the characters, the story segments are individually interesting enough to want to continue the game and see the entire cast. Traveling to these characters can be pretty neat. First of all, Amaterasu moves like Bullet Bill with 3 speeds. Clearing rivers can be a breeze as her jumps match the momentum of her sprint. The way Amaterasu moves makes scouting for treasures, secrets, and doing side quests really enjoyable. Treasures help you get money for stronger weapons and skills. And completing missions and feeding frolicking animals gives experience points. The points can be allocated to increase the amount of health and ink you have, as well as the amount of food Amaterasu can eat or the amount of money she can carry. If Amaterasu has a full stomach, she can revive after death, but I never died because the game gives health items and buffs all the time, which renders the full stomach revival to be kind of useless. Purchasing support items is cheap too, and even without buying the items, Ōkami is still a walk in the park for most of the game. If items had a stronger internal value, there would have been more motivation to scavenge around too. Not that battles are boring. Ōkami actually has a neat system going for it. It's simple to understand, yet allows for more of an offensive or defensive approach depending on how you equip Amaterasu. I like to take the offensive and shoot energy blasts when I'm too far to hit with the sword. Check this out.
Sick 'em, girl. Yeah, I said sick 'em. Wait, stop. No, no, stop. Stop, please.
You can totally see Hideki Kamiya's combat design trace itself all the way back down to Ōkami. And you know what? It works. So anyway.
I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Sometimes defeating enemies requires the Celestial Brush. The elements can be controlled with it, so draw a gust of wind and flying enemies will stagger. Melt the ice demons by drawing up a blaze of fire, etc. Casting the elements is a pretty fluid experience with the motion control on Joy-Cons, and is the most immersive way to play, but I can imagine this gimmick getting tedious if you're just using the controller. I think it's pretty brave to make a lot of the gameplay centered around the brush on a console like the PS2. Actually drawing the symbols in the air or on the screen creates a great sense of impact. Speaking of brushes, the Japanese ukiyo-e and shoujugiga inspired art style is amazing. Sometimes objects pop in and out, but considering the art style being attempted about 13 years ago, it's pretty understandable. The music is nice. I especially like it when the shamisen plays. I wish there was more shamisen. I'm waiting for the day a samurai or ninja game comes back with a soundtrack that features every amazing shamisen play in Japan, like the Yoshida brothers. Now after exploring, fighting, and reading through lots of lines of text, Amaterasu eventually encounters what gamers call dungeons. I would say there are only 3 dungeons out of the 8 that are intricate and elaborate in the way a Zelda player would expect a dungeon to be. The rest feel more like small set pieces, which are fairly linear experiences for the most part. It's a shame because these linear dungeons are hyped by the exposition, and then barely any time is actually spent in them. What's there is a fun and focused, but short experience. Although it takes a few hits from a slightly weak item design and story pacing, Ōkami is a great adventure game with a high level of production value. The Celestial Brush gameplay and expression of Japanese culture makes for a fun and beautiful adventure. Now, for the language portion of this review. Let's start with the good points of playing this game in Japanese. You can obtain knowledge of different dialects and special verb endings used by different generations and regions. I was happy to meet the moles who speak in the famous Kansai dialect, usually used in Kyoto, Osaka, and TV comedy. I already knew quite a bit about the Kansai dialect thanks to my Japanese friend, who is a proud citizen of Kyoto. She made me replace every ending and conjugation I was formerly taught with Kansai-ben. If I didn't encounter this dialect in real life, the moles would have been an enriching learning experience. Phrases like akan and suffixes, or their unique endings such as yanen, would have pulled me to the dictionary, which would have revealed the Kansai world to me. Nande yanen, nande yanen, nande yanen. There are multiple instances where this kind of learning experience can occur in Ōkami. Sometimes some cultural jokes and references are more subtle, and the gaming experience is enriched by having certain knowledge beforehand, like the ladies gossiping at the well. However, due to the nature of the game, you can absorb and make cultural connections by playing the game in English too. The most typical example would be this bird onsen caretaker that wants to kill himself out of shame for not having the water running. He's just lighting himself on fire.
Life is full of mysteries. Life is full of hardships.
Another thing I like about this game when it comes to Japanese is isun. Isun uses a lot of what linguists call onomatopoeia, or mimetic words. Onomatopoeia is the process of creating a word that phonetically imitates, resembles, or suggests the sound that it describes. My personal favorite is debu debu, or literally fat fat. I like to translate it as fat lard.
Tina, you fat lard, come get some dinner!
And that's among a bunch of other stuff you should avoid repeating. Isun uses a lot of onomatopoeia that you can use to make your Japanese more emphatic and exciting. My favorites from the game are sukkarakan and pika pika. Sukkarakan is an adjective or noun and is used to convey that something is flat out empty. It's usually used in the context of someone being flat out broke. Many might know Pika Pika from the little yellow mouse Pikachu. Pika Pika is used to describe something shiny or sparkly. I love these words because they are memorable and fun to use in conversation. One hardship that first-time Japanese game players might face is archaic vocabulary. If one decides to pursue the route of Japanese gaming, it's a good idea to remember that archaic vocabulary will usually take the place of pronouns and ending suffixes or conjugations. Well, at least that was my experience in Ōkami. You will encounter many pronouns addressing Amaterasu with different levels of politeness. Not everyone knows Amaterasu is a god, so for example, Onushi is an archaic pronoun that's used for this goddess wolf even though it's for referencing equals or inferiors. Luckily, many of these old school words will be presented frequently, so a first timer will get used to them pretty quickly. It'll be tough reading when gods communicate to each other, but that's alright. Those sections are fairly brief. Lastly, and probably the most important topic of this video, is the language learning pace. As I stated in the beginning, the reason why I wanted to play a Japanese game in the first place is to have fun and learn new vocabulary in a natural manner. This game provides a pacing that can be rough even in English, so playing it in Japanese at an N3 level felt like a burden at times, and my enjoyment dissipated. Every 2 to 3 blocks of text, I faced a line that would contain a cluster of vocabulary which would send me to the dictionary. In the first 2 hours, I needed the dictionary on nearly every block of text. This game would be horrible to play had I not used a fan-made script on the internet. All I did was type in Ōkami Serifu, and you can try this with any other game as well. I would also recommend using a plugin like Rikkai-chan to make searching for definitions faster. Sadly, doing this just helps you get through the egregiously long sections of dialogue. I personally can't retain every word I go through if I want to get some gameplay in my session. I tried to counter this by typing specific words I thought could be useful in the near future into a Word document, and then added them into a vocabulary deck later to practice. In the document, I added various translations of items and menus for future reference. When I returned to the game after some practice, I was able to read a lot more vocabulary gradually. Nearing the end of the game, a lot of sentences started to feel like a breeze, although spikes of tedium were still there. After a little more than 3/4 of the game, there was no more script left. It looked like the transcribers got tired themselves. It was a little more challenging to go without a script, but at this point, I knew way more than the beginning, which made the end a much more pleasant experience. I love this because it showed that I grew and that this experience still had value. But even saying that, I kind of agree with the commentator on Reddit. It's not worth it if you want a fun gameplay to language learning ratio. For someone at an N3 level, a new word's memorability rate suffers because of how many unknown words I was bombarded with. If there was less text, or if I understood the text for the majority of the time, a word's memorability rate would increase due to the impact of finally seeing a fresh word in a block of text that is understandable. In addition, the context usually gives the meaning away too. That being said, I want to return to Okami with better Japanese in the future. Maybe after I pass the level 2 Japanese language proficiency test with a good score, I'll come back to Ōkami just to see how different the pace will be for me as a supplemental benchmark. Or even better, I'll go straight to Ōkami 2, as director Hideki Kamiya is interested in coming back to do a sequel.
Okami is going to be back.
Really?
Really.
Oh.
Now, I don't know how all the rights work to this IP of Ōkami, but they need Hideki Kamiya back for it. They need Ikumi Nakamura to make some more art. Yo, we need to get the squad back together. Please make Ōkami 2. Peace out. Thanks.
"街を彩るけど」